Hey everyone, this is Joe with the Adapt team. In this video, we're wrapping up our Adapt training residence. Yay! So the first thing that I want to talk about in regard to wrapping up this program is what to do when you need to add or remove devices from your Adapt system. Step one, no matter if you're adding or removing, is to add or remove simple Windows modules from your program. Depending on if you want to add modules, you'll need to add those Adapt modules. If you're trying to delete devices from your system, you'll remove those Adapt modules from your program. And then you're going to compile, load to your processor, and then wait for the program to boot up completely. And this step is important. The program does need to be fully booted up. And then if you are adding devices, you're going to want to make sure that you pull down the Adapt file, because those devices will have only gotten added to the Adapt file that's on the processor. So you want to make sure to pull down that Adapt file if you're adding devices. Or if you're removing devices, we've built in this command called file cleanup that will clean up your Adapt file, and we'll see why this is helpful in just a sec. So if we go over to console here, what I've done is I've loaded an updated version of our training residence program. And all that I've done is I've deleted this second AV receiver that was kind of extraneous before. You can see it's still in my config right here, but then we've also added these additional 7 rooms or so. And I've just simply compiled and loaded that program. And when my program boots up, the first thing that I notice is that I get these AV receiver module missing errors or notices, whatever you'd like to call them. They're really just console messages, I guess. And what this is saying is that, hey, there is some data that's in your Adapt file. It's this receiver with this kind of ID. This is our ID scheme here. And all these inputs that kind of go along with it. And that module no longer exists in our simple Windows program. That's what this message is kind of saying here. And so that's how we know that we've removed a device from our system. Now, if we wanted to check when we've added a device, right, all we need to do when we add a device is we just need to pull down the latest Adapt file. So we can do that right here. And when I pull down this latest Adapt file, notice that we do in fact have these additional rooms. So these additional rooms are ready to use right now, in fact, without removing the other receiver. I don't actually have to remove this receiver at all. But let's just say I did want to keep my Adapt file kind of clean. We wanted to make sure that we're not automatically deleting this configuration data for you, right? Maybe there's been some mistake and maybe you didn't mean to delete this module from your program. We would hate to automatically delete that configuration data for you. So you kind of need to tell the system that you manually want to delete that data. And the way that we do this is we use our UCMD box down here and we run the UCMD file cleanup. What this file cleanup command does is forces the config to update itself based on the modules that currently exist in our simple program. So obviously that receiver module no longer existed, and so running our file cleanup command forced the program to delete all that information, that extraneous information from our Adapt file. And console even tells us here, make sure you extract the file to see those changes. So let's go ahead and do that. And we will pull down this latest file. And we should see that now that receiver is no longer there. Its data has been deleted from our Adapt file. And now that we've got these additional rooms, we can kind of go through and start to name the rest of these rooms according to our program. These room names right here are in fact global, kind of like our source names. These room names are global, and so I want to make sure that these match whatever is requested by my client. And now that I've got these room names here, I'm ready to start to add devices to each of these rooms, just like we did for our living room. Notice that all these zones are actually pretty close to the same, and so they all take an audio zone and a display. Of course, if you had an audio only zone, then you would only need to add, an audio zone to that room and not have to worry about a TV. And finally, for this theater zone, it is important that we select the receiver for our theater as the audio device in this room. And that's how the system understands that it's this receiver that's controlling volume in this room. And of course, we add our theater projector. And so if we go to send in this program now, actually there's one more thing we need to do to actually look at this. One of the things that we also try to do when you add the rooms to your system is we wanted to not automatically add new rooms to every touch panel. And so when our adapt file got created, the only room that existed was this living room. And so it added the living room to every single one of our touch panels. You see that right here. But when we added rooms, we didn't want to automatically add rooms for you. Maybe you didn't want that. Maybe that was undesirable. And so let's go through and actually do that. I'm going to add all the rooms to this particular touch panel. And these are all the rooms that the touch panel can kind of navigate to and from. So now let's go ahead and send in our updated config. And what I've got loaded up right now is I've actually taken our 26 room example iPad and I've simply done a run as in VT Pro. I've not done any save as or anything like that yet. I'm just simply running this project, and we're going to see how well this kind of represents our system. So here's our X panel here. The first thing we can notice is that we have indeed now all of these rooms added to our system. We already have our sources and they are all populating correctly. So without touching anything at all, we have at least that much functionality done. One of the things I like to kind of do when I'm here and I'm ready to test multiple rooms in my system is I like to utilize our multi-room feature to quickly do stuff to multiple rooms at once. So let's do that here. So if we go to, say, multi-room, let me clear this out. And I can go to the living room, and we already tested this before, but if I say turn DirecTV on in that room, you can see that room has now turned on. If I now go and I select the master bed, we can turn that room on. You see this is all output 2 stuff happening now. This all looks correct. I think this guy is actually the input command for room 1. We'll actually wait to make sure about that. Yeah, so here's our input command for room number 2. And we can of course start to ramp volume in that room to double check that. And so those were our 2 dynamic IR controlled rooms. Let's remind ourselves what this master bath was here. The master bath, was that also dynamic? So this one was, oh, so we're using Samsung commands there. All right, so that's I guess why we see the command TX. So that makes sense, right? So we have our power on command that got fired to the master bath right there, and we have our input 1 command that got fired right there, and we of course made sure to route our audio and video. And we could go test the kitchen as well. The kitchen is another manufacturer. I forgot what we did for that. Maybe that was a, is that a Samsung or Sony? Or, yeah, I think that's what it is. Master bath was our Sony, and I think this one was our Samsung. So that's that Samsung turning on. Now, of course, I could go through and I could test the rest of these zones, you know, no problem. I could certainly do that. But really to maybe kind of stress this system, to really put it under load, maybe what I want to do is control multiple of these rooms at once. To do this, actually the first thing I forgot to do is I need to make sure that all of these sources are multi-room sources. Multi-room sources is essentially how we define what sources are capable of getting sent to multiple rooms at once. So obviously most of these sources we can send to most of our rooms, with the exception of the Blu-ray and Xbox. And in fact, this is also reminding me that also back on this Rooms tab is where we define the source list for each room. So right now, in fact, the living room has this Blu-ray and Xbox available, which it should not, right? The living room has no way of getting this Blu-ray and Xbox, so I can simply delete those devices there. And now those sources are no longer allowed in this room. And I can, of course, copy and paste these source lists across all of my rooms nice and quickly like this. Actually, the theater does have access to those, and that's okay. And let's say maybe for the theater, maybe we want to prioritize this Blu-ray source. We can prioritize that up in the list, and it will appear higher in the list. So now let's send that in. Always like to watch console here. It's already done. Oh, there it goes. Give it a minute. Alright, here we go. The first thing that I notice about this UI is that my share button has appeared for this source. And that's my indication that this is now a multi-room source. And so another way I can verify this is under my multi-room page, and we see that we have all these sources here. So let's go ahead and try to send one source everywhere and see what happens. You see a bunch of stuff happening. You see pretty much every output did something as far as either a packet TX or a command TX to turn on a receiver in that zone. You see that we routed every output of our DM that's being used. We routed audio in the rooms that are looking for it. What else did we do? We set volume in zones. We made sure to set the theater to the correct input and its startup volume. And actually one thing that I think is pretty cool is right now I can actually control the grouped volume for all of these zones, and you can see of course it is sending volume levels to all 6 of my amp outputs, but it's also sending a direct volume command to my receiver. And this is of course one benefit to having that direct set volume commands, is that we can send exact levels to that unit. We're going to switch to another source. We can see all of that same type of stuff happening very quickly. So that's nice and easy. And really the biggest difference between our multi-room page and our individual page is that now I'm getting each room's source list. So of course all these rooms share a source list, but the theater, now I have that Blu-ray and Xbox source up here, and we can see how that executes down here. We sent our receiver to the Blu-ray input. And so that was my long-winded explanation of adding and removing devices to the system, and also kind of getting this touch panel up and working without modifying it at all. Now, one of the things that we will need to do in our touch panel is we will want to, of course, we're going to start from our 26-room example VT Pro projects. That's where we're starting all of our touch panels from. But the very first thing we're going to want to do is do a save as, so that we can define in VT Pro which source subpages to use for all of the sources in our system. So what I mean by this, if I go to my DirecTV page, this looks correct, and I can come in here and I can save a channel preset, and all is kind of well and good. So this source subpage is working fine. But when I go to my TiVo source, actually this one is working as well. Maybe my Apple TV source, yeah, so this is certainly not an Apple TV page that we see on my UI here. This is certainly not a Roku page. This is not Kaleidoscape, and I could go on and on. This is not Autonomic. This is not this is nothing. And the reason I'm getting this is because we haven't yet told our VT Pro project which pages to use for which device. So before I do any manipulation to my VT Pro project, I want to go ahead and do my save as. I'm going to name that my training residence iPad. One thing I like to do is I like to copy this file name right here, because what I'm going to want to do eventually is go back into Simple Windows and make sure that I have that project name pasted right here, so that my my iPad can pull down its VT Pro project from the processor. And similarly with my iPhone, I would want to do that right here. And that's how my Crestron apps will be able to pull down their projects from the processor. All right. So my VT Pro has done its save as here. And when I say we need to define in VT Pro which source subpages to use for which sources in my system, essentially when we built Adapt, we needed something that was ultra flexible. We needed the ability for you as programmers to build your own subpages and use those subpages in your real projects. And so the way we've done that is this. We have this one media page here. This is simply join number 82, which, by the way, you can always verify on any one of our touch panels. If we look at join 82, you will see that's our media page right there. And so this is a simple visibility join on this page. And so whenever you're on this page is when any one of these subpages that are under it can get thrown or shown visible if their join numbers go high. So 511, 521, 531. And the way that this works is we essentially want to start at join number 511, And that's the subpage that's going to represent source number 1. And for source 2, we're going to jump up and we're going to use this join 521 and 531, 541, 51, and so on and so forth to represent all of the sources in our system. And again, the idea is that you can design your own source subpage to make it look visually however you want. And as long as you've joined it at the correct join number here under your touch panel, that's the subpage that you will see for that source. Again, if we go back to our touch panel, you can see all of these joins right in front of you here. If we go down to 511, notice that this is where it says source 1, and then down to 521, source 2. And this also clues us in as to why there's this increment of 10 between source 1 and source 2. And the reason is because we've reserved 10 subpages for each source or device in your system. This is of course for sources that maybe have a lot of controls to them, or even if you think about, say, your iPhone or your phone user interface, you may not be able to fit all the controls onto a single page, and so we allow you to have up to 10 subpages per device, just a nice round number here, and you can choose from any one of those 10 from your UI. And so what we're going to do in our VT Pro project is we already saw that our DirecTV and our TiVo pages already work. And in fact, that makes sense, right? Because DirecTV is source 1 in our system and it's joined at 511. TiVo is source 2 and it's joined at 521. So those already work. So the first thing I'm going to do is just clean up any sources that I'm not actually using in my system, any source subpages that I'm not actually using in my system, and just blow those out right away. And now I can go in and start to attach the correct joins to these sources in here. So Apple TV is source 3, so 531. Roku 541. My Kscape was actually next, so that's going to be 551. Let's see, I forgot how we did this. So we did our Autonomic at source 11 and 12, so let's do that. Let's reorder these media player pages here. So there's some extrapolation here, right, for source 11 and 12. I've done this enough. I know that source 11 is 611 and source 12 would be 621. But of course, if you forget that or you need some assistance, again, these are all just standard join numbers. So right here, I know source 11 subpage 1 is 611. So I have those two, and then my Blu-ray, that's going to be, I think I chose source 21, so that's going to be 711, and then my no controls are my game source, that's going to be 721. And so now when I go ahead and do this run as, we should hopefully see that these source pages are indeed correct. So I have my UI back. The first thing I notice is that I am indeed looking at this media player object for my Autonomic. I don't have an Autonomic connected, so I don't expect this to populate, but I can kind of click through the rest of my subpages and verify that they are on their correct subpages, and so far we are looking good. We can of course double check that our touch panel controls are working by opening up debugger. This is source 1, and so when we're hitting these, we expect to see source 1 packet TX get fired, and sure enough we are. Let's do source 2, we can check that. Sure enough, source 2 is firing here. Apple TV right here, source 3 is firing. Roku is source 4. My Kscape, I don't think this works without a live connection, so we won't see anything here because I don't have a Kscape hooked up. And my Autonomic, we can really only just check these media player subpages showing up, and in fact they are. And so at this point, we've now got a fully functioning, 7 or 8 room system here with, I think some popular gear that you guys are likely to kind of run into. And so at this point, this program would be essentially ready to deliver on site. We would want to, of course, activate it once it is on site, and there will be an activation video probably next. And this program is essentially wrapped up and good to go. I will be posting a link to this program and its adapt file for you guys to reference as you'd like. But that will just about do it for this training residence program. we're going to talk in future videos about all of our non-AV devices, and we will actually just be referencing our 26-room example. And so this program, like I said, would in fact be done from an AV perspective, and hopefully we can see that this only took us a couple hours from start to finish, and that was with me explaining everything. So hopefully in a more production environment, this would take you significantly less time than it took you to watch all this stuff. So that'll wrap up this video, and we will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.